Donald Trump is one of the most controversial political leaders on the planet. So, of course, his recent presidential victory has unleashed all kinds of reactions. Just a few hours after his victory, we could already see headlines like these.
The global risks of a Trump presidency will be much higher this time. A wrecking ball. Experts warn Trump's win sets back global climate action.
And well, what can I say? It's to be expected. Trump is not exactly a normal leader. He's prone to spouting outrageous nonsense every now and then. That he wants generals as loyal as Hitler's, or that his former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Milley, should be sentenced by a military tribunal. These are just 3 examples of a guy who says the first thing that pops into his head. That makes Trump a constant mine of controversy. The truth? I'm not even clear on the extent to which media outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post have been upset with his election. Trump is going to make their job very easy. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty about what his second term will be like. Some fear that he'll turn everything upside down with his economic plans. And I say this not only because of the much discussed tariffs, but also because there's a danger that Trump will embrace the same path that once doomed Liz Truss. That is, to carry out a huge increase in public spending while lowering taxes, which is exactly what he did back during his first presidency. Meanwhile, others say it won't be that big a deal. That as far as the economy is concerned. This time, Elon Musk's group will be at the helm, that they will be looking to cut taxes, adjust spending somewhat, take advantage of plans already approved but not yet implemented, such as the Infrastructure Act, and above all, cut a lot of regulations, which would be reasonably good. The fact is that we've already talked about all this on Visual Economic in a video that I'll leave for you in the description. But, as with the economy, Trump's policies are tremendously controversial across the board, from the environment to racial justice, international politics, and, of course, the free market. But we're not just here to repeat what everyone else is already saying. You know that we here on VisualPolitik have been critical of Trump, but that doesn't mean that we don't think the president-elect doesn't have a point in many areas. VisualPolitik community, when we think Trump is wrong, we will tell you so, but we'll also tell you when we think he's on the right track. And that's precisely why we made this video. What are we talking about? Well, let's get into it.
The highlights of his foreign policy.
In 2016, there were headlines very similar to the ones we can find today. There were even those that said that Trump would start World War III. Well, mistakes were made, but things didn't get too out of hand. Be that as it may, today, 8 years later, concerns are once again on edge. And it's true that there are troubling aspects about the new president. Things like this.
Donald Trump suggests he would not defend Taiwan from China.
What's more, in recent years, under the Biden-Blinken tandem, the United States has strengthened its former alliances as never before. This happened in Europe, but also in Asia, particularly with Australia, Japan, and South Korea. 3 countries that could even be on the way to forming the basis of a NATO-type military alliance. It would be the expansion of AUKUS, and something that, take note, the Japanese Prime Minister has already called for, because he says he found it frightening to see that no one came to Ukraine's aid simply because it did not belong to NATO. So now he advocates exactly this.
The creation of an Asian version of NATO is essential to deter China. Today's Ukraine could be tomorrow's East Asia.
So of course, this would be a huge success for the United States. Nevertheless, Trump could be a stumbling block. Why? Well, because he's not exactly a supporter of these multilateral organizations, and because in his first term, he got everyone in the region all riled up with demands like this.
Trump wants South Korea and Japan to pay more for defense.
Of course, Trump also recognizes that the Taiwanese semiconductor industry is crucial to the United States. And certainly if what he and his team are aiming for is to lock down China, I'm sure it's clear to them that, in that mission, both Japan and South Korea are indispensable. Of course, the scariest thing about Trump right now is that he will most likely hand Putin a victory. We told you about that recently here on VisualPolitik. But it's precisely at this juncture that the points on which Trump is right appear. In terms of security, in Europe there is fear. I mean real fear. Dread that the United States will pack its bag and say goodbye. And I'm not just saying this because the United States has a lot of military bases in Europe, or because, for example, it's ultimately the guarantor that the Mediterranean Sea is a sea free from threat. This naturally is not a donation. For the United States, bases in Europe are strategically crucial for maintaining its operations in the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and increasingly the Arctic. That's why many analysts say that no matter what Trump says at a rally, he will never pack his bags from Europe. But in any case, the point is that this fear is especially noticeable in Eastern European countries. In countries such as Poland, Romania, and the Baltic republics, they consider the support provided by the US security shield to be their best protection against Russia. The truth, that's a huge collective failure. Because let's see, the European Union has 450 million inhabitants and an economy of almost $20 trillion, which is 3 times the population and an economy 10 times stronger than Russia. And they failed because for years, the European countries have been ignoring a commitment that, fair or not, they themselves voluntarily signed up to. I'm talking, of course, about the military spending requirement of 2% of GDP agreed within NATO. Trump was not the first to cry foul. Barack Obama did it before him. But Trump has been the one who has expressed the most anger. And he is right about this. Agreements need to be honoured, and it isn't acceptable for European countries to behave like freeloaders, making US taxpayers pay for their security. In any case, this is something that is already being resolved. Practically all European countries are increasing their military spending. With the 2024 budgets, only Spain, Luxembourg, Slovenia, Belgium, Italy, Portugal, and Croatia do not meet this percentage of military spending in Europe. But not surprisingly, years of underfunding have made the state of many of Europe's militaries dire. And that's why Trump's team is already hinting that maybe that 2% target needs to be increased. And let me stress, Europe alone should be able not only to defend, but also to arm Ukraine without any major problem. In any case, this increased military spending would strengthen the power of the free world in the face of the growing influence of autocratic countries such as Russia and particularly China. For example, if we're really talking about defending Taiwan or South Korea, the United States has to be fully focused on Asia. So here, Trump is not only right, but also the effect could be beneficial for everyone. For the time being, in the wake of Trump's victory, European leaders are already talking about how to strengthen Europe's military and security capabilities.
French, German defence leaders urge European unity after Trump win.
Of course, this is not the only foreign policy point where Trump is surely right. VisualPolitik community, from Trump, we can expect many things. But if there's one thing that we could be 99% sure of, it's that he will go back to his maximum pressure strategy against Iran. A strategy of massive sanctions and punishments against the Ayatollah's regime. And this may be good news. Basically because the Biden administration's objectives with respect to Iran have not been met. They took a gamble on dialogue and negotiation, and it didn't do much. Biden wanted to resume negotiations so that Iran would put aside its nuclear plans. To this end, as a gesture of goodwill, and also because the sanctions against Russia required it, he lifted a large part of the main economic punishment. That is, sanctions against Iranian oil were lifted. Washington decided to look the other way because that would be the best for everyone. And so, since Biden's arrival at the White House, Iranian oil once again flowed around the world, especially to China, achieving the highest export levels since Trump's 2018 abandonment of the nuclear deal. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Biden's team had more than enough reason to do so. The problem is that when it comes to Iran's nuclear plans or its determination to finance all kinds of terrorist groups, this relaxed approach didn't help. Iran continued to be relentless, and Saudi Arabia even had to seek China's backing, which was basically a case of Uncle Sam shooting itself in the foot. And so, Iran has continued with its missile program, has not cancelled its nuclear bomb development operations, and to top it off, has developed a drone industry that is supporting the Russian war effort. And then we have their support for Hezbollah, for the Houthis, who have greatly reduced the passage of large merchant ships through the Red Sea, and let's not forget their support for Hamas. As you all know, this has caused Israel to go on the rampage against all these threats.
So much so that the region is experiencing wildly high levels of tension. Dear VisualPolitik community, Biden has had many successes and many wins in foreign policy, but Iran has not been one of them, and we're not talking about a minor issue.
Iran is not only a huge threat to the global economy, as we've already told you in several videos here on VisualPolitik, but also if it goes ahead with its nuclear weapons program that could fuel an unprecedented nuclear proliferation, countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates would want to cover their backs. Naturally, that would make the world much less safe. And here, Trump seems to be betting on a policy of total asphyxiation that may make a lot of sense, especially when the regime has less and less social support. So everything indicates that those sanctions that almost completely emptied Iran's central bank reserves and reduced the country's oil exports by more than 2 million barrels a day will be back very soon. This could also make it very difficult for Iran to try to rearm groups like Hezbollah, to which Israel is causing serious damage. Indeed, with Trump's 2018 sanctions, Iran was left with no choice but to drastically reduce funding to these groups. In other words, a return to a maximum pressure scenario could help stabilize the Middle East. With a weakened and under-resourced Iran, Israel could end Hamas and Hezbollah capabilities without them being able to rebuild, at least not to the pre-October 7th, 2023 level. Or as Trump himself would say, he could finish what he's already started.
Trump says Israel needs to finish what they started and said war with Hamas is taking a long time.
And it certainly could be the best way to let the Ayatollahs know that enough is enough with the nuclear blackmail. But we don't have to go that far to find another point of foreign policy where Trump is likely to be right. Any ideas? Well, pay attention. It's no secret, relations between Trump and Mexico have been a continual tug of war. During Trump's first term with Andrés Manuel López Obrador, there was some understanding, but also tensions. Let's not forget that Trump wanted Mexico to pay for the famous wall. But in this second term, Trump looks like he's going to want to be much more ambitious. Soon on VisualPolitik, we'll talk to you about mass deportations, but there is another issue that could signal a real turning point in relations with Mexico.
Trump says Mexico is controlled by cartels and the government is petrified of fear of them.
There's one thing Trump is right about. If you want to fight cartels, you have to do several things, starting with reinforcing the border. Keep in mind that the Mexican cartels are not only involved in classic drug trafficking, but also in human trafficking, bringing thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants into the United States in a business that earns them some $13 billion annually. Well, in order to attack two of the major sources of financing for the Mexican cartels, and along with it, two of the major problems they feed, the uncontrolled flow of drugs into the United States and illegal immigration, Trump has a plan to copy his friend Greg Abbott, the Texas governor. In recent years, Abbott has succeeded in significantly curbing illegal crossings from Mexico, mixing mile-long barbed wire barriers, hundreds of buoys on the Rio Grande, and thousands of Texas National Guard patrols. Abbott has managed to reduce the number of illegal immigrant entries at its border by no less than 74% since 2021. Well, that's what Trump now wants to replicate across the country, and to do so, he's clear. He needs more men on the front lines.
Trump calls for border agent hiring spree with new pay hikes.
But as well as reinforcing the border, he also wants to operate in Mexico.
Trump plans to send kill teams to Mexico to take out drug lords.
Following his election, Trump has been very clear. He will show no mercy to the narcos.
Our country is being poisoned from within by the drugs and by all of the other crime that's taking place. The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels.
VisualPolitik community, the problem of the narco groups in Mexico has escalated without anyone being able to put the brakes on them. We're talking about groups that, in recent years, have caused more than 350,000 deaths and 70,000 disappearances in Mexico alone. On top of these figures, we have to add all the fatalities in the United States. Just think of the fentanyl epidemic. What's more, the cartels are only impediment to Mexico becoming a rich and prosperous country. They are the ones fueling rampant levels of violence and corruption. The problem is that Mexico is incapable of controlling this problem on its own. And maybe that's why Trump is correct here. Even so, the reasonable or expedient ideas that Trump has aren't limited to foreign policy.
Reducing bureaucracy. FAA chief defends latest delay for SpaceX rocket launch. Last week, Elon Musk said he's taking his issue with the agency to Congress.
It may come as a surprise to you, but the Federal Aviation Administration put a SpaceX launch on hold for damaging some birds' nests on a previous launch. It's an example that, of course, when you dive into it, probably isn't so ridiculous, but the problem with mismanaged good intentions is that you can end up causing multi-million-dollar damage and unjustifiable delays in technological development. For Donald Trump, levels of federal bureaucracy have become an out-of-control leviathan that not only slows innovation, but also discourages economic growth. So what solution does he propose? Well, cut the size of the administration, and above all, reduce regulations. To do this, on the campaign trail, he announced his intention to put Elon Musk at the head of a new department that would have two jobs: reducing regulations and cutting public spending. Elon Musk himself has been one of the biggest activists against excessive regulations. He's gone so far as to say that in the United States, it's easier to build a rocket than get a permit to launch one. And the point is that here, Trump may be quite right as well. For example, since January 2021, the number of federal employees has grown by almost 121,000 workers. This increase is still lower than the growth in the private sector jobs, but it has still been a larger increase than that of the previous decade. Of course, the point is that all these workers have also been accompanied by new regulations. This is something that both Donald Trump and Elon Musk want to cut back. And with a huge budget gap of 6.5% of GDP, austerity in federal jobs seems reasonable. In the same way that, yes, it would be good to tackle regulations that, even in the United States, have gone out of control and are currently one of the biggest obstacles to economic development and innovation. In fact, in his first term, both the corporate tax cuts and the elimination of some regulations were good for the economy. Business investment during the first 3 years of Mr. Trump doubled, and companies have since managed to improve their balance sheets and their businesses, largely due to these policies. For example, the number of pages in the Federal Register, which is the bulletin where rules, regulations, notices, and executive orders are announced, was at its lowest in 2017 since 1993. It wasn't a big change, but it helped. And so now it appears that the incoming Trump administration will try to increase that change. But that still leaves us with at least one other point where Trump is surely right.
Drill, baby. You are looking at, overall, a drill, baby, drill philosophy. You are going to see offshore lease sales. You are going to see pipelines move much quicker. You are going to see fracking on federal lands, and a mindset that is focused on lowering energy costs for consumers.
Trump wants to give free rein to the oil and gas industry. The last few years have not been bad for them either. Even Biden has given out more drilling permits than Trump did in his first term. And thanks to that, these days, US oil production is well over 13 million barrels per day. The president-elect has already made it clear: leave the oil in my hands. We have more liquid gold than any other country in the world. Of course, by leaving it in his hands, he means freeing it from regulations and bureaucratic demands that, according to him, only make energy more expensive. We discussed that his administration plans to expand offshore lease sales, relax drilling restrictions in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, and increase hydraulic fracturing on federal lands. Of course, it's a given that Trump, if Biden himself does not do so first, will repeal Biden's moratorium on new permits for liquefied natural gas exports, particularly to Asia, something that could send gas sales soaring again, bringing in billions to the United States. And why do we say that Trump is probably right here? Well, for several reasons. First, because oil and gas could be an important strategic advantage. Increasing their production could reduce prices on the international market, to the delight of developed countries, and to the chagrin of tyrannies such as Russia and Iran. Second, because it could improve the lives of Americans. And third, because although it may seem counterintuitive, the transition to cleaner economic forms requires, above all, economic growth and resources for innovation. The best example is Texas. The oil state par excellence in the United States is becoming one of the world's major powers in solar energy. Another example, Barack Obama's decision at the time to support gas over coal for electricity production has led to a huge reduction in polluting emissions in the United States. In fact, Kamala Harris herself also advocated in her campaign to boost the oil and gas industry. At VisualPolitik, we have been very critical of Donald Trump, and we certainly don't like his manner, nor do we like his Peronist policies when it comes to foreign trade. But that's not to say that the president-elect is not right on many issues, or at least that he may have a positive contribution to make to the United States and the world. In this video, we have focused on the more pragmatic issues. We'll leave the gender issues and so on to you. We've done so because we are convinced that these ideas we have highlighted could have majority support. As I said before, when we think Trump is wrong, we'll let you know. But we'll also tell you when we think he's on the right track. That said, the question is, what do you think of the points we have touched on? Do they seem reasonable to you? Would you include any others? Leave us your impressions in the comments and let's start a debate. And if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. Thank you so very much for being there. All the best. See you next time.